Hello class, welcome to the next segment in the week 5 material. And in this segment, we're going to be taking a look at how we can combine lists with a for loop to get the computer to access each individual entry in the list and do whatever we might want it to do with each individual entry in the list. So to sort of start off here, we have the same variable name that we had in the previous two segments with my list. And then on the right-hand side here, we have another list of numbers. But instead of using the first 9 digits of the number pi, here we're taking a look at the first 9 digits of the number e, which is something that is especially important in the realm of calculus. In fact, e is a very, very special number when you're working with anything calculus related. And if you've taken any calculus classes, then you know why e is so special. But that's the list that we have here. And again, there are 9 entries in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now we have on line 4, we have a sort of the same for loop that we've been working with back in the week 3 material. So again, I is our looping variable, and that's the variable that's going to be counting up as we go through each cycle of the loop, just to sort of refresh your memory on how that works. And again, when we have two values in the range function here, our looping variable is going to start at the very first number in the range. So the first cycle through the loop, I will be 0, and then go up to but not including the second number in the range. However, for this particular range function, we have something here in the range that's not exactly a number, but in the end it is going to be an actual number. So again, this kind of ties back to what we were talking about in the previous segment, how it pertains to the len function. So again, len function, all it does is take the list that you give it, and the way that you know which lists you're giving to the len function is by what's in the parentheses here. So because my list, this variable name, is contained within the parentheses of the len function, we're telling the computer to go find my list, which we've defined up here on line 2, and count how many entries are inside of that list that we've given it. So if the computer counts how many entries are in my list, it should get a value of 9, since we've established that there are 9 entries in that list of numbers. So essentially what this does is the computer just counts up how many, or just evaluates this len function and gets a number from that, and that number will then take the place of the second entry that we put in the range function. So since this in the end is going to give us a value of 9, again, this will automatically adjust based on how many entries are in the list that you give it. So I could add 15, or I could have 15 entries in my list, but it will automatically adjust the second value in the range based on how many entries are contained within my list. But that point aside, in the end, we get a value of 9 from this, telling the len function to operate on my list. So that means I will start at 0 and then go up to, but not including 9. Again, the second entry that ends up being in the range function here. And to really help illustrate going on, this is where it's very, very nice to have the tables that we introduced in the week 3 material when we were talking about loops. The tables in this case are very, very helpful for helping to illustrate what exactly is going on here and how exactly this is all working. So again, we've established our looping variable I starts at 0, goes up to but not including 9, the number we get back from this len function. And then here we only have one statement right now in the loop, just simply printing out what my list bracket I is. And again, we established in the first segment that you can absolutely put a variable in the brackets here. So again, this setup pulls individual entries out of the list in question. You can absolutely put a variable in here as long as that variable is in fact an integer. So let's go ahead and take a look at how exactly, or what exactly is going on here in something that's a little bit more illustrative. So again, the list that we have here, we have the for loop, and we have the ended print statement, which is something the computer is going to run as it goes through each cycle. So when the loop first begins, or the first time going through the loop, I starts off at the first number in the range function, which is 0. Then the computer is going to find my list bracket I. So again, the way this works, when you have a variable in the brackets here, the computer is going to look up what the value of the variable is at that point in the program. And since we've argued that, or since we've established that I is equal to 0, the computer is going to take that value of I, put in the brackets here. So the first time through the loop, the computer is going to be plugging in a value of 0 in the brackets. And by plugging the 0 in the brackets, that means pull out the very first entry in my list. Again, what we call the first entry in a list, the computer calls the 0th entry, or item number 0 in the list. So we're going to plug that 0 into the brackets here, pull out that item of the list, and then the computer is going to print out whatever that entry in the list is, which we can see on the screen should be this 2 here. So again, column for each individual value that we're interested in. Here we're interested in the variable I and also the value of the entry in the list that our value of I actually pulls out of the list. So we go to the next cycle of the loop. I will be 1. And then again, we simply plug that value of I into the brackets here, which is 1. And that will in turn pull out this 7. Again, item number 1, what we humans would call entry number 2 in the list. We're going to pull out that 7, item number 1, and print that information out to the console. And then when we go to the next cycle in the loop, I will be 2. And then we plug that 2 into the brackets here, which is going to pull out this 1. So again, plugging the current value of I in here, which in this cycle is 2. So this is essentially the same thing as just doing my list bracket 2, which pulls out this 1, item number 2 in the list. And we go to the next cycle when I is equal to 3. Again, the computer will take that value of I being 3 and plug that into the brackets here and pull out the corresponding entry in this variable called my list, which we can see is this 8 here. And when we go to I equals 4, the next cycle through, we plug in this 4 into the brackets to get this particular entry, this 2. Then we go to the next cycle when I is equal to 5, plug that value of I into the brackets here to pull out this entry, this 8. And then we go to the next cycle when I is equal to 6, which would correspond to pulling out this value of 1 here. So again, taking that current value of I, plugging it into the brackets, that will give us my list bracket 6, which gives us this value of 1. And then we go to the next cycle when I is equal to 7. So again, we plug the value of I into the brackets here. So that's the same thing as just doing my list bracket 7, which would give us this 8. And then we take we go to the next iteration where I is equal to 8. We plug that 8 into the brackets here. So we essentially get the same thing as my list bracket 8, pull that entry out of the list and print it out. Which if we pull out entry number 8 in the list, that'll be this 2. And again, this upper bound in the range function is not inclusive. So we go up to, but not including the result we get from evaluating the len function, which we said earlier is going to be 9. So we go up to, but not including 9. So that means the last value of I will in fact be 8. So in essence, you can see that this just pulls each entry out of the list one by one. And since we have the print function here, we're in fact printing that information out. We're printing out each individual entry that we pull out of the list that we have defined up here. So if we want to confirm that result, we can jump back over to our Python program and tell it to run. You can see it does in fact print out each individual entry in my list in sequence or as it appears in the list. Now something else I'll go ahead and add, just to sort of prove a point here. It turns out having statements like this, what I just added on line 5 here, that is also perfectly valid. So in this case, on line 6, we're just simply taking the value that we pull out of the list and print that number out to the console. Here, we're pulling the value that we get out of the list and telling the computer to multiply that value by 2, and then that end result will go in this variable x here. So again, let's go ahead and jump back to the table. So my thing will cooperate. Sometimes this thing, yeah, there we go. Sometimes this thing's really finicky, but here we go. So now let's do the same. This is the same exact thing that we just added, and now we're going to take a look at how this changes, or how the variable x changes as we go through each cycle in the loop. So again, table for each relevant value, and this is going to function very similar to what we had before. So again, the starting value of I is going to be 0. We plug this value of I, plug the value of I into the brackets here, which is 0, so we get my list bracket 0, which will pull out this 2, and we take that 2 we pull out of the list and multiply it by 2, taking this entry out of the list and multiplying it by 2, and that value will then go in x. So my list bracket 0, just that alone is 2. We take that 2 and multiply it by 2 to get the value of x, which should be 4. And here we just simply printing out what the value of my list bracket I is. We're not printing out what the value of x is. We're printing out what my list bracket I is, but we'll confirm both of those assertions. We'll confirm what happens when you just print out my list bracket I, and we'll also confirm what happens when you print out the value of x for every cycle through the loop. But then we can go to I equals 1. Just like before, plugging this 1 to the brackets is going to pull out this entry, which is a 7. Then we're going to take that 7, multiply it by 2, put that result in x. So now x should be 14 when we go through the second cycle through the loop. And then when I is equal to 2, again, we take that 2, plug it into the brackets, tell the computer to pull out entry number 2, which is this 1 here, take that 1, multiply it by 2 to get the value of x. And then we go to I equals 3, same idea, pull out item number 3 from the list, which is this 8, take that 8, multiply it by 2 to get a result of 16 for x. And then we go to I equals 4, again, plugging in the value of I here, so we get minus bracket 4, which pulls out this 2, take this 2 we get from this, multiply it by 2 to get the value of x. And then we can go to I equals 5. The next cycle through the loop, we plug a value of 5 into the brackets here to get this 8 back from the list. So we get this 8 multiplied by 2 to be 16, which is the value for x. And then we can go to I equals 6, again plugging the 6 into the brackets here. We get my list with the 6 in the brackets, which gives us this 1, and then taking that 1, multiplying it by 2 gives us the value of x. And then we go to I equals 7, take that value of I, plug it into the brackets here, so we get my list bracket 7, which gives us this 8, take that 8, multiply it by 2 to get the value of x. And then finally, when I is equal to 8, we plug that value of 8 into the brackets here, or into the brackets here, we get this value of 2, take that 2, multiply it by 2 to get the value of x here. So you can see that as we're pulling each entry out of the list, we're multiplying it by 2 and then putting that result in x. And you can see how x changes every time we go through the loop, depending on what value we pull out of the list, and then what determines the value we get from the list is determined by what I is. So this is mostly an example to prove that you can operate on the result you get back from using the brackets here. So I'll go ahead and jump back to Python. You can absolutely operate on this expression right here. There's nothing to say that you can't do that. So we'll first print out the same thing that we had before. So here we're printing out what my list bracket I is, which is the same exact thing that we had before. Now I'll print out what the value of x is at each cycle through the loop. And if we tell the computer to print that out, you can see we get 4, then 14, then 2, then 16, which matches up to what we have in the column for x here. Well, that's going to do it for this first loop that we're working with. And that's going to do it for this first segment. We're going to take a look at a different kind of loop that we can use to accomplish the same thing, but I'm just going to cover that in a completely separate segment to avoid putting too much material into this one segment. So with that, I will see you all in the next segment when we tackle using a different kind of for loop to accomplish the same end goal.